When he said,
"I'll keep this family together, just like Dad did."
Through the crack in the door, the spoon slipped from my hand and hit the floor. The living room was heavy with the smell of rain. The TV flickered in the dark, and the cold meatloaf on the table made my stomach turn. I first heard those exact words 38 years ago, from my husband's mouth. I endured, I broke down, I was unbearably lonely. But I can't let my granddaughter inherit the same hell. So that day, with my hands shaking, I picked up my phone. Why all of this happened I'll tell you from the beginning now. You're listening to Silver Story Tree, where the voices of life's late chapters gently bloom again. Subscribe, like, and turn on the bell to hear more heartfelt stories that grow with time. I heard the door close. That familiar sound coming from the living room. I was in the kitchen baking meatloaf. The sizzling sound from the oven, mixed with the smell of cooking meat, filled the entire house. My husband David sat on the living room sofa, cracking open a beer can and turning on the television. The local Washington news was playing. I was washing dishes, listening to his voice drift toward me. Men are all like that, you know. They might fool around a bit. As long as they don't leave home, it's fine. David said it. I don't know who he was talking to, but his muttering carried all the way to the kitchen. At that moment, I almost dropped the plate in my hands. Because hearing those words brought back memories from 30 years ago. The small rental house in Kansas. One morning when morning sickness had me doubled over. I was washing my husband's shirt in the bathroom. That's when I smelled it. An unfamiliar perfume, red lipstick stains smeared on the collar. I collapsed right there and cried. A baby was growing in my belly, and my husband's dirty shirt was in my hands. That night, David looked at me and said it. It's really nothing. I'm keeping this family together. I believed him. Or rather, I tried to believe him. I told myself I had to keep quiet for the sake of the child. That was 38 years ago. Now I'm standing in the kitchen of our suburban house near Tacoma, Washington. I'm 67 years old. My hair has gone white, my hands are covered in wrinkles. But those words remain exactly the same. I'm keeping this family together. As long as I don't leave home, it's fine. On one side of the living room bookshelf, an old document envelope was sticking out. I sometimes look at it. They say it's the property title. But the pages covered in English don't register properly. I never really learned how to read legal documents. I just trusted my husband to handle it. That's when the phone rang. Ring ring. The sound of our old landline filled the house. I dried my hands and picked up the receiver. "Mom, it's me," Emily said, my daughter-in-law. Her voice was trembling slightly. "Eric's been coming home late every day lately. He says it's work dinners. But something feels off. Eric is my son. He's 38 this year. He works at a company in downtown Seattle. My daughter-in-law Emily is an elementary school teacher. They have an 8-year-old daughter named Lily. Is something wrong?" I asked. Emily couldn't speak for a long time, then let out a small sigh. "It's just, when he comes home these days, he showers right away and goes to sleep. He barely talks to Lily either." After hanging up, I went back to washing dishes. Through the running water, young Eric's face came to mind. My son was about 3rd grade. One day he came home from school crying and asked me, "Mom, is it true Dad has a girlfriend? That's what the kids are saying." I couldn't say anything. I just held Eric and told him everything was fine. Back then, David didn't come home either. He said it was late overtime. That's when it happened. A low voice came from the hallway. It was Eric's voice. He seemed to be on a phone call. "I'll keep this family together. I'll do it like Dad did." I froze in place. The sound of the plate falling into the sink echoed loudly. Eric hung up his phone in the hallway and closed his door. That night, I couldn't sleep. Looking at my husband snoring beside me. 38 years flashed through my mind. All the moments I had endured passed by like a slideshow. And I realized, because I said nothing, my son grew up exactly the same way. Outside the window, I could hear rain falling. The long night in suburban Tacoma was deepening. The next morning, I took the bus heading to downtown Seattle. While waiting at the stop, cold wind brushed my face. In my hands I held a shopping basket and a bag of medicine. The bus jerked to a stop. With the whoosh of the doors opening, I climbed the steps and sat in the back seat. Through the window I could see the highway. Gray waters stretched along the I-5, in Elderly couple in the back seats was having a conversation. An American grandmother's voice reached my ears. Our son got divorced for cheating. You have no idea how hard it was for his wife. I turned my head. I tried to just look out the window, but that grandmother's voice kept coming. Women these days don't put up with that anymore. We used to endure back then, but not now. I clenched my hands. I made fists until my fingers turned white. The bus kept moving, and the scenery outside passed quickly by. Another memory rose in my mind. When Eric was in elementary school. One evening, my son came home from school crying and said, "Mom, kids at school said they saw Dad with another woman." Even then I couldn't say anything. I just said it was fine, that the kids were joking around. I put warm food on the dinner table. David came home late and ate his meal as if nothing had happened. I'm keeping this family together. Don't worry. That day too, my husband said the same thing. As I washed dishes, I remembered Eric's tearful face. And I felt infinitely small for doing nothing. I got off the bus and headed to the supermarket. I work part-time at the deli counter here. From early morning I fry chicken and make sandwiches. In the afternoon, I go to my daughter-in-law's house to watch my granddaughter Lily. My days are filled like this. I move so busily there are no gaps. Because that way I don't think. I try not to recall those 38 years, all those moments I endured. The only time my heart feels at ease is when Lily burrows into my arms. My granddaughter says in her small voice, "Grandma, when I grow up, I want to live with you." Every time I hear those words, my chest grows heavy. Lily is everything I want to protect. I just don't want this child to live like I did. But lately my daughter-in-law Emily's face has grown dark. Dark circles have settled deep under her eyes. Eric says he's working overtime a lot. He goes on business trips frequently too. Late work dinners have become common. I know that pattern. My husband behaved exactly the same way 30 years ago. Coming home late, making excuses, then coming home late again. Each time I couldn't say anything. Because of the child, because of the house, because of keeping up appearances. One night, I rummaged through the living room drawer. An old document envelope came into my hands. The envelope, they said, contained property title documents. I slowly unfolded it. Small letters packed the pages. English words about joint ownership and survivor rights. I read one line, then just folded it back up. I don't really understand what it means anyway. Right then it happened. I heard sobbing from the upstairs bedroom. Emily's crying. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, listening to that sound. I remembered myself 30 years ago, crying in the bathroom of our small Kansas house. That night when I saw lipstick stains on my husband's shirt and collapsed in tears. Back then, no one heard my crying either. Now my daughter-in-law was crying. The time I had endured was continuing to the next generation. I sat on the living room sofa and looked out the window. No stars were visible in the Tacoma suburban night sky. It was a sky thick with clouds. The document envelope was still in my hands. I stared at it for a long time, then pushed it deep into the drawer again. And I muttered to myself, I don't know how to read documents like this anyway. A few days later, I finished the supermarket deliveries and headed to downtown Seattle. I stopped at a small cafe near Pike Place. I ordered a cup of coffee and sat by the window. Through the window I could see people coming and going. Rain was falling lightly. People with umbrellas passed by with quick steps. I held the warm coffee cup with both hands. That's when it happened. Casually looking toward 3rd Avenue, I spotted a familiar figure from behind. It was Eric, my son. Eric wasn't wearing a suit. Not the clothes he wore to the office. He had on a hoodie and jeans. Next to him, a young woman was walking along. I felt my breath stop. I put down the coffee cup and watched those two people. Eric and that woman had their arms linked. Then naturally, they held hands. My heart sank with a thud. I stood up from my seat. I grabbed my bag and opened the cafe door. Outside, raindrops touched my face. I can't just let this go this time. The words came out of my mouth on their own. I took my phone out of my bag. My hands were shaking, but I turned on the camera. Eric and that woman walked toward Pioneer Square. They entered an alley between old brick buildings. Then stood in front of a building with a motel sign visible. I watched from a little distance. Eric wrapped his arm around the woman's waist. Then the two of them went inside the motel together. I raised my phone. I filmed everything so the motel sign, street signs, and time were all visible. My hands were shaking badly and the screen trembled. But I kept holding the record button. 30 years ago I couldn't do this. Back then there was no way to keep evidence. I just had to trust my husband. Or rather, I had to pretend to trust. But now it was different. I had a phone in my hands. And my son's image was captured completely on the screen. I stopped the video and checked the file. My reflection appeared in the convenience store window. White hair, wrinkled face. That image overlapped with my young self from 30 years ago, waiting for my husband at a Kansas bus stop. Back then I couldn't do anything. I just endured, trusted, waited. But not anymore. I decided not to endure any longer. On the bus ride home, sitting in my seat, I replayed the video I'd just taken several times. On the screen, Eric entering the motel with the woman repeated again and again. Rain kept falling outside the window. I could hear the wipers moving left and right rhythmically. I put the phone in my bag and looked out the window. This time I have to be different. If I don't speak up, nothing will change. When I arrived home, the sun was setting. I opened the front door and went inside. David was in the living room watching television. I went to the kitchen without saying anything. Standing at the sink, listening to the running water, I thought, what should I do now? Who should I tell first? That night, I couldn't sleep. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, I recalled my son's face in the video. That moment when Eric wrapped his arm around the woman's waist kept circling in my head. Near dawn, the rain stopped. I looked out the window. Between the clouds, starlight was beginning to show faintly. The long night was ending. The next evening, I called my daughter-in-law Emily to the kitchen. I asked carefully, is Eric really coming home late because of work these days? Emily hesitated for a moment. Then she answered in a small voice. Mom, actually, I saw the motel name. I didn't recognize charged several times on the card statement. I plopped down in the kitchen chair right there. My hand automatically gripped the table. My image from 30 years ago came to mind. Back then I didn't even know what a card statement was. My husband earned the money, and I just did housework. I never even thought to check what card was used where. But Emily was different. My daughter-in-law opened her banking app and showed me. On the screen, a downtown motel name was charged multiple times. The next day, I was working at the supermarket deli counter. The sizzling sound of frying chicken filled the air. That's when a familiar customer came in. It was Helen Brooks, a regular at this supermarket. In her hand she carried a bag with the Legal Aid Center logo. The moment I saw Helen, I gathered my courage. Across the counter I asked carefully, if my husband changed the property title to only our son's name, what should I do? Helen looked surprised. Then she answered seriously, first you need to check the current title at the county recorder's office. A few days later, I went to the Pierce County Recorder's office with Helen. We walked through the large building lobby and stood at the document inquiry window. I could hear the employee tapping at the computer. Tap, tap, tap. The keyboard sound overlapped with my heartbeat. A moment later, paper came out of the printer. I received that document with trembling hands. I looked at the name written at the top. Owner Eric Anderson. My name was nowhere. I'd lived in this house for 38 years. But not a single letter of my name was written there. Helen gently patted my shoulder. Then she said, check if your husband wrote a separate will. Search for documents at home once more. That night, I searched through the living room cabinet. I opened the bottom drawer. Old envelopes covered in dust came out. I pulled out one of them. The writing on the outside of the envelope caught my eye. Last will and testament, David Anderson. I slowly tore open the envelope. Folded paper came out from inside. When I unfolded it, English filled the pages densely. I read line by line. The family house is left entirely to son Eric Anderson. Below in small letters, my name appeared. Wife Margaret will receive monthly living support. That was all. No specific amount, no time period. Just one vague sentence. I sat at the table and spread out that document. I laid the property title and the will side by side and stared at them. Then I took out my phone. On the screen was the video I'd filmed a few days ago. The scene of Eric entering the motel. I placed all three things side by side on the table and stared at them for a long time. Property title, will, and the video. These 3 things were all I had. I could hear rain outside the window. The Tacoma suburban night was quiet. In that silence, I thought about what to do next. I'd endured for 38 years. I'd lived without saying anything. But now it was different. I decided not to stay silent anymore. A few days later, I unfolded David's will and read it again. Sitting at the table, I read line by line slowly. The family house is left entirely to son Eric Anderson. Wife Margaret will receive monthly living support. That last sentence stuck in my eyes. It was vague. How much I'd receive, until when, nothing was clear. Just words about receiving support. I placed that document in the middle of the table. Next to it I spread out the property title. Then I took out my phone and played the video. On screen, the scene of Eric entering the motel with the young woman played out. I placed those 3 things side by side and stared at them for a long time. A few days later came the day David had his heart checkup. I'd been waiting for that day. I prepared Sunday dinner when the whole family would gather. 6 o'clock in the evening, the doorbell rang. Ding dong. Eric and Emily, along with my granddaughter, Lily, opened the front door and came in. The table was set with roast chicken and salad. David sat on the living room sofa watching television. Everyone sat down. I heard Eric pouring a glass of water. The sound of water filling the cup. The clink of setting down the glass echoed in the quiet house. David opened his mouth. Until I die, this house is Eric's. A man needs to have a house to be a proper head of household. The moment I heard those words, I stood up. I walked to the living room and turned off the television. The screen went black. Eric looked at me with a puzzled expression. Emily was holding her breath. I took a cable out of the drawer next to the television. I connected my phone to the television. The screen turned on, and my phone screen appeared large. I opened the video file. I pressed play. On screen, downtown Seattle streets appeared. Eric walking hand in hand with a young woman came into view. Emily covered her mouth. A small moan escaped. Lily looked up at her mother, not knowing what was happening. On screen, Eric and the woman stood in front of a motel sign. Eric wrapped his arm around the woman's waist. The scene of the 2 entering the motel together. Everything was captured completely. Emily burst into tears. The sound of sobbing filled the living room. Eric's face turned white and he couldn't say anything. I stopped the video and returned to the table. I picked up the property title and the will. I spread them on the table one by one and said, "Is this the way you said you'd keep the family together?" My voice didn't tremble. All the words I'd held back for 38 years came out in one sentence. David's face hardened. His lips trembled, then he spoke. "That was written a long time ago. Actually, that woman tricked me back then." I sat in my chair and looked at my husband. David couldn't speak for a long time, then slowly opened his mouth. "That woman said she was pregnant. Said it was my child. Asked for money." I held my breath and listened. This was a story I'd never heard once in 30 years. Later I found out that child wasn't my biological child. It was another man's child. That woman just took the money and disappeared. David's voice grew smaller and smaller. He pressed his hands on the table and lowered his head. "After that I couldn't face you. So I tried to at least save face by giving the house to Eric." Eric said quietly, "Dad, why didn't you tell me?" David couldn't answer. He just kept his head down. I looked at my husband. We'd lived together for 38 years, but I'd never seen this expression. He was old and exhausted. "But you're still my wife. I kept the house together, didn't I?" David said. I slowly shook my head. "Not the house. You kept your pride together." At my words, the living room grew quiet. Only the ticking of the clock could be heard. Eric was silent for a while, then opened his mouth. It was just for a moment. "I'll keep the family together." At that moment, the words I'd heard a few days ago came to mind. Eric's voice on the phone in the hallway. "I'll do it like Dad did." My chest sank coldly. My son really was becoming like his father. Emily said in a tearful voice, "Is this a family? Do you want to show Lily a home like this?" Only then could Eric not lift his head. He covered his face with his hands and began to cry. I could hear his shoulders shaking. I said quietly, "Because I did nothing, you grew up exactly the same. That's why I'm trying to stop it now." That night, I called Helen. Listening to the phone ring, I waited. Helen answered. "Separation or divorce, property division, will, I want to rearrange everything." My voice was firm. Helen was silent for a moment, then answered. Come to the office tomorrow. Let's sort it out together. After hanging up, I looked toward the end of the hallway. I could sense someone behind the door. David seemed to be standing there. But the door didn't open. Dawn broke. I was brewing coffee in the kitchen. Steam rose from the coffee pot. David sat on the living room sofa. His face showed he hadn't slept all night. Dark circles had settled deep under his eyes. I poured 2 cups of coffee and went to the living room. I placed one in front of David and drank from the other. Warm steam touched my face. David picked up the coffee cup with trembling hands. He took a sip, then slowly opened his mouth. I was really sorry back then. But I couldn't say it. I didn't answer. I just drank my coffee and looked out the window. The morning sun was shining on suburban Tacoma. When that woman demanded money, I was scared. What if the child really was mine? David's voice continued. I listened to that story and remembered 30 years ago. Back then I was raising Eric in our small Kansas house. Struggling with morning sickness, washing my husband's shirts. When I discovered the lipstick stains, it felt like the world was collapsing. But I couldn't say anything. A baby was in my belly, and I had nowhere to go. I had no choice but to endure. Later I did a paternity test. That child wasn't mine, David said. I turned my head and looked at my husband. Then why didn't you tell me? I asked. David couldn't answer. After a long silence, he muttered quietly. I was ashamed. And I felt sorry for you. I let out a sigh. 38 years passed through my mind. During all that time, I never heard the truth. That afternoon, Eric came home. The doorbell rang, and I opened the door. Eric's eyes were swollen from crying. We sat side by side on the living room sofa. Eric couldn't speak for a long time, then slowly opened his mouth. I didn't want to live like that either. Eric said. I looked at my son. When I came home from school as a kid, the house was quiet. Mom was crying in the kitchen, and Dad came home late. Eric's voice trembled. I listened quietly. I heard what friends said. They saw Eric's dad with another woman. That's when I asked Mom. Do you remember? I nodded. I remembered. Eric was in 3rd grade. Mom didn't do anything. She just said it was okay. Eric said. I felt my heart collapsing. So I thought, oh, all adults live like this. Whatever Dad does outside, as long as he keeps the house, it's fine. At Eric's words, I closed my eyes. The times I stayed silent had become wrong lessons for my son. Emily was good at first. But after we got married, I felt suffocated. Work was hard, coming home Lily needed care and it was chaotic. Eric kept talking. As I listened, I realized it was exactly like David's excuses. When I met that woman, it was just comfortable. She didn't demand anything. It just felt good being together. Eric said. I asked quietly. What about Lily? What about Emily? Eric lowered his head. He couldn't answer. That evening, Emily came. She said she left Lily at the school's after-school program and came alone. Emily's eyes were red and bloodshot. We sat around the kitchen table. David, Eric, Emily, and me. I spread out the documents Helen had given me on the table. Information about divorce, separation, property division, changing the will. Do we have to get divorced? Emily asked. Her voice trembled. Eric couldn't answer. I looked at the two of them. And I said, that's for you two to decide. But you have to think about Lily. Emily burst into tears. Eric covered his face with his hands. Mom, why didn't you ever say anything to Dad? Eric asked through tears. I was silent for a long time before answering. I was scared. Scared of being left alone. Didn't know how I'd raise the child. So I endured. My voice trembled too. Words I'd suppressed for 38 years burst out. But that was wrong. Because I endured, you grew up like that. I looked straight at Eric. My son was looking back at me. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Next to me I could hear David's breathing. The sound of regular inhaling and exhaling. We'd lain together for 38 years, but never felt as distant as tonight. I closed my eyes. I'd arranged to meet Helen tomorrow. A few days later, I went to the Pierce County Courthouse with Helen. We climbed the large stone steps and pushed through the revolving door. The sound of the door spinning echoed. The lobby was spacious. People came and went, shoe sounds echoing on the marble floor. I followed Helen down the corridor. It was the Legal Aid Center consultation room. A small room with a desk and a few chairs. We sat down. Helen pulled out several documents. The sound of papers rustling filled the air. Margaret, there are 3 options now. Divorce, legal separation, or just rearranging property. Helen explained. I nodded and listened. Divorce ends everything. Separation maintains the marriage but you live separately. Property rearrangement just fixes the house title and will. I thought for a long time. Through the window I could see the courthouse parking lot. Cars coming and going, people walking were visible. I want to start by rearranging the property, I said. Helen nodded and took notes. Then first we need to change the house title to joint marital names. Right now only Eric's name is on it, Helen said. I looked at the property title again. Only the name Eric Anderson was written. The following week, David and I went to a lawyer's office. We met the lawyer in a small conference room. A middle-aged female attorney. Documents spread on the table. Settlement agreement, title change application, new will draft. At first David refused to sign. What divorce at this age, he shouted. Not divorce. Arranging your rights, Helen said firmly. David hesitated for a long time, then finally picked up the pen. Scratch, scratch. The sound of signing echoed in the quiet room. I also wrote my name. Margaret Anderson. After 38 years, it was the moment my name went on the property title. The lawyer explained. Now this house is marital property. You each own 50%. I nodded. I felt one side of my chest growing warm. We also drafted a new will. If David died first, my elderly living expenses and medical costs would be prioritized. The remaining property was arranged. So my granddaughter Lily would receive a certain share. What about Eric? I asked. The lawyer turned pages and answered. Mr. Eric can receive partial inheritance on the condition he attends marriage counseling and repairs his family. I called Eric. The ringing sound went several times, then my son answered. If you don't get counseling and lie again, you'll be completely removed from the new will. My voice was firm. Eric was silent for a long time before answering. I understand, Mom. A few days later, I rented a small apartment in suburban Seattle. A 1-bedroom, not spacious, but it was my space. On packing day, David stood in the living room watching me. He said nothing. I also packed silently. As I carried a box and left through the front door, David said quietly, I'm sorry. I turned my head. I looked at my husband. His face was old. I know. I answered shortly and closed the door. I walked down the corridor and took the elevator. The sound of the door closing echoed. First night in the new apartment. Outside the window I could hear city buses passing. Footsteps came from upstairs. I lay in the small bed staring at the ceiling. It was an unfamiliar space, but I felt strangely at ease. Now I'm finally living in my own name, I muttered to myself. That night, I fell deeply asleep for the first time. The next day, Helen organized my file. She neatly inserted the motel video screenshots, title change documents. New will copy. At the front of the file was a memo with a red line drawn through it. A sentence David had left before. I'm keeping this family together. A red line was drawn over that sentence. I received that file and put it in my bag. I was on my way to work at the supermarket. Standing at the bus stop waiting for the bus. The morning sun was rising. The bus came. With the sound of doors opening, I climbed the steps and sat down. Looking out the window, I thought, this is just the beginning. Several months passed. Fall deepened, and leaves piled on Seattle streets. I was sitting on a waterfront bench downtown. In my hands was a warm cup of coffee. Steam rose gently. I could see people walking along the water. A familiar voice came from a distance. A child's laughter. I turned my head and saw Lily running toward me. Grandma, Lily shouted. Behind her, Eric and Emily were walking hand in hand. I deliberately turned my head pretending not to notice. Lily came and sat next to me. Her small hand grabbed my arm. Grandma, we're going to get ice cream today, Lily said. I stroked my granddaughter's hair. Eric and Emily approached. They both looked more comfortable than before. Eric knelt down to Lily's eye level. Daddy, don't make mommy cry. Okay, Lily said. Eric nodded and answered. I'm sorry. I promise. I don't want you to live like Grandma did. Eric's words reached my ears clearly. I took a sip of coffee. The warm liquid went down my throat. Emily sat next to me. For a while we silently looked at the water. Seagulls cried as they flew around. Mom, we're getting counseling. Eric and I together. Emily said quietly. I nodded. You're doing well, I said. Emily smiled slightly. That evening, I returned to my new apartment. I went into the small bedroom and opened the closet. Inside hung the checkered shirt David had left behind. I took out that shirt and held it in my hands. I touched the sleeves. No lipstick stains like before. Instead, paper was folded in the shirt pocket. When I unfolded it, it was a copy of a bank account with my name on it. Medical insurance documents were also included. David's at a rehabilitation hospital these days, recovering after heart surgery. They say once a week he reads storybooks to Lily over video call. I took out my phone and made a video call. The signal rang several times, then David's face appeared on screen. He was lying in a hospital bed. His face still looked old, but his eyes were different from before. Margaret, David said. I looked at the screen. I'm sorry. Thank you, he said. He repeated the same words over and over. I was silent for a long time before answering. You haven't completely changed. I changed, so now I can finally draw the line. My voice was calm. David nodded. After hanging up, I opened my phone gallery. That video was still there. The video from that day when Eric entered the motel. I stared at that file for a long time, then pressed the delete button. Are you sure you want to delete appeared? I pressed confirm. The video disappeared. Instead, I opened the file folder and took out the property title and new will copy. I put them back in the front page. Outside I could hear a bus passing. Brake sounds, door opening sounds, people's footstep sounds echoed in sequence. I sat at the small desk. I opened a notebook and picked up a pen. Slowly I wrote letters down. To Lily, Grandma wants to leave you this story. Keeping the family together wasn't what mattered. It was protecting the people inside it. The sound of the pen moving echoed in the quiet room. Scratch, scratch. Letters were carved on the paper. It took Grandma 38 years to realize that. I hope you'll learn it a little sooner than Grandma did. After writing the last sentence, I put down the pen. I closed the notebook and put it in the drawer. I looked out the window. Stars were beginning to appear in the suburban Seattle night sky. The clouds cleared, and stars appeared one by one. I stood up and went to the window. On the street below, people were coming and going, cars passing by. It was an ordinary evening scene. But for me it was a special night. After 38 years, it was my first day living in my own name. From a distance I could hear church bells. Bong, bong, bong. They rang 8 times. It was 8 in the evening. I went to the kitchen and made tea. The sound of water boiling in the kettle bubbled. I poured warm tea into a cup and went back to the window. Taking a sip of tea, I thought, this is the beginning. My real life is starting now. That night, I sent Lily a text. Grandma loves you. You don't have to live like Grandma did. I hope you'll be happy. After sending the text, I put down my phone. I lay in bed and closed my eyes. There were sounds in my ears. Footsteps from upstairs, the sound of a door closing at the end of the hallway. The sound of a city bus in the distance. Everything was unfamiliar, but comfortable. Because now this was my space. A place where I lived in my own name. That's how I fell asleep. After 38 years, it was the first night I fell asleep comfortably. Keeping the family together wasn't what mattered. It was protecting the people inside it. It took me 38 years to realize that. I hope you'll learn it a little sooner than I did. Everyone, if any of you have been like me and kept enduring things in your family. Without saying a word, I want to speak to you. Through this experience I learned that I must protect my heart and my dignity before I protect a house or a name. I realized it late, but it is not too late. And we still have the courage and hope to choose ourselves. If you have had similar experiences or feelings, please share them quietly in the comments so we can be a comfort to one another. If my story has given you a bit of strength, I would be thankful if you could walk with me by subscribing and liking this channel. If someone comes to mind as you listen, please gently share this video with them. Thank you sincerely for staying with me to the end, and I wish you long-lasting health and peace in your life.